Achieving optimal health and self-realization in the modern world involves more than just diets of our food and exercise. It requires a new relationship with light, externally and internally. Welcome to the Light Diet. I love your writing and your work.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you.
It's amazing, and I think more people need to know about it. So the podcast, I'm calling it The Light Diet because my own experience was that the food-focused diets weren't adequate to explain or heal some of the health issues I was struggling with from, when I was younger, and am still in the process of, working through. Mostly I was having lots of headaches when I was younger, gut issues and allergies and so on all the time. And so I began a journey to try to understand them. And then now I'm here, and it just seemed that, food diets were one of the main approaches, but the light diet is sort of the ultimate approach, at least as I came to understand it. And still have a lot to learn about the various subjects myself, but that's why I wanted to do this podcast, so I can continue to learn from experts and then share as I learn from, share this with a broader audience, these kinds of conversations. So.
Well, I'm glad you reached out. I don't think of myself as an expert. I just see myself as an inspired person with a great deal of direct experience, which is something that very few people understand. A direct experience isn't Jacob had an experience or Matt had an experience. A direct experience is something that occurs between one's essence and life without the camouflaging impact of the mind. So it's something that occurs by itself, usually as a surprise, that silences you. It's so profound, it just silences you. And it convinces you of something without giving you any research or references or external documentation. It's something that after you experience it, you know it by heart. And it's not something that you can convince others of, because you can never convince others that need convincing. And it's very profound. And it's where most, if not all, of my lifelong lessons have come from. So that's what's guided me to move in one direction or another, and then to share it.
I've been listening to Luminous Life on Audible. And it's very inspiring. I would say each time I pick it back up, I have a feeling of almost direct experience. It just conveys this level of energy that I find so inspiring. Many books or many podcasts, it's just sort of accepting the framework of the world as we live in it. And so in a book like yours, where it's really questioning the way things are and the way we see things, it just opens my mind up to think, wow, I'm taking this all so seriously all the time. Maybe there's got to be another way that obviously certain people have discovered. So I think it's really fascinating.
The body is like a piece of glass. If you could imagine a piece of glass that has little imperfections in it, as most glass does, or maybe it has fingerprints on it, or maybe it's not pure. When light goes through it, some of the light is transmitted. Some of the light is reflected and lost. Some of the light is refracted. It's bent in one way or the other, which is also lost. If you could now imagine a piece of glass that has no imperfections, it's just perfectly clear. When light impinges upon it, 100% of the light goes through it as if the glass isn't there. The glass is invisible. Our health and wellness is dependent on how invisible we are to the light, so that it doesn't get reflected or refracted or absorbed. It just shines through. And when it shines through, the thing disappears and all there is luminosity. That's called a luminous life. And so it's interesting that when you look at pictorial representations of saints, of individuals who supposedly awoke, you notice that all the time they have halos and glows around them. And that's literally because it isn't that they shine, it is that they literally become that light which is coming through them. It's unobstructed. So a luminous life has to do with allowing the energies of life to traverse our humanity with minimal or no interruption. And when that happens, we literally become holographic focal points of the sun. We become bright. And just like insects are attracted to brightness, humans and situations are also attracted to brightness. I'm not speaking now metaphysically or spiritually or theoretically. I'm speaking about very fundamental aspects of life that I've come to see and come to experience directly.
That was one of the things in your book early on that struck me. I think it was even in the introduction, this notion or idea of not planning things. You said you had tested a week where you didn't plan anything. Essentially, you just attended to whatever took your attention. And that is very interesting. And of course, some people say the monkey mind starts to wonder and wander. How is that possible? How can you do that? I run a business. And of course, there's all these questions and I guess maybe even excuses why not to just take each thing one at a time as they come up. But how would you sort of explain for someone like myself who is running a business and I feel that I need to do some level of planning because there's so many ongoing projects and focuses, how would you explain that, applying that concept into the life of someone like myself or anyone really who feels that they have a lot that they need to manage and be on top of? And maybe one way to add color to my question is, it's an interesting light analogy let's add some color to this story.
Yeah.
Here. So is it maybe what you're referring to? Is it maybe that it's not so much just about what we're doing necessarily, but more about the way in which we do it. For example, like I can plan for my business and that's okay, but when I'm doing it, I'm present with that process of planning. And then when I go to the next thing, I'm present with that. What do you think? How would you explain this for someone who has trouble grasping it?
Okay, first of all, it's ungraspable. So it's not that it's difficult to grasp. It's ungraspable by the part of our humanity that enjoys grasping, which is the mind. The mind is like an octopus that says, I want that, I don't want that, I agree with that, I don't agree with that. Rather than applying woo-woo principles, I think we just have to use common sense. I'm a very grounded person. I'm also a person that has a lot on their plate for their entire life. To give you an example, I don't know when you started walking as an infant, but if you were like most people, you started walking around 9 months, 10 months, some a little bit earlier, some a little later. For some reason that I have no understanding about, I stood up and started walking when I was 6 months old. Now, that's a fact. I wrote about it as a small boy when my mother told me. And I've been moving fast my whole life. Not because I want to or I don't want to. It's just I'm built like a cheetah. Others might be built like a turtle. A turtle is no less than a cheetah. It's just has a different nature. Yes? So why am I sharing that with you? I also have a business. I also am a parent. I also am a husband. I also mentor individuals. I'm involved in a lot of things. And I don't miss any of them. And I am among the most responsible people you'll ever meet in your life. I don't have any bills. I don't have anything to do. Everything is done. I didn't come into this interview today asking you to please ask me certain questions that I know the answers to. I'm not interested in that. That is no fun. What's fun is meeting this person who I know nothing about, but for some reason or other, something moved him to reach out to me. I have no idea why. And whatever something was that moved you to reach out to me, moved me to have an immediate yes. I get asked all the time to do interviews. It's a weekly thing, yes? I've done thousands of them. Some I'm too busy to do. Some absolutely must be done. This was one of them. Don't ask me why. I have no idea. But something took me there. And so I went, not knowing, having no idea, and yet just being here. So now let's get to the very practical pieces. You're in Idaho right now. Do you, when you go to sleep at night, do you pray or have an intention that you want the weather to be a certain way the next day?
I do not.
Right. And if you did, do you believe that you would be able to effectively influence the weather?
Not necessarily, but I also wouldn't say it's impossible.
Okay, so you believe that you could influence the tides of the ocean or the phases of the moon or the rising of the sun?
This I doubt.
This you doubt.
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, you don't have to think too much about it, because the idea that you're controlling the weather, the seasons, the cycles of life is probably very close to ludicrous. Okay?
Yes, I would agree.
So, now let's bring it home to you. Do you control your heartbeat?
No.
Do you control your blood pressure?
No.
How about your respiration?
Generally not.
Generally not. If you could control it, it would be for a few seconds, but then it just has its own rhythm. Is there anything physiologically that you control?
I would be inclined, the first thing that came to my mind was my thoughts, but then, of course, I realized that, am I really controlling the thought that came up and said my thoughts? I don't think so. So I think I see where you're going. I don't think I control any of my functions. I mean, even if I choose to extend my arm, I think I'm choosing it, but sometimes it just happens before I really think about it.
So I'll tell you a fact of science. There is nothing in this physical machine we call our body that is designed to initiate action. Let me phrase that in a way that's easier to understand. We are not designed to do. That's why we're called human beings, not human doings. And the reason we're not respond to do is because there's an automatic system within all of humanity and all of nature that responds automatically. So when something scary occurs and your heart needs to pump more blood to a certain part of your body, it occurs automatically. When that isn't going on, your heart slows down. When something is chasing you, you don't think about whether I should run fast or faster. Your body just runs fastest, and it does it without you. You don't have a damn thing to say about it at all. And so there's nothing in Mother Nature that you're controlling. And there's nothing within your own physicality that you are controlling. And yet we live by this false notion that we're in charge, that we're supposed to make things happen, that we are running our business. Well, there's a fundamental business called life, which is the foundation of all businesses. And it has certain very basic laws. Rain comes from the sky with sunshine. Plants respond by growing. They literally turn themselves to receive the light, the rain, and so on. Our system works exactly the same way. Everything takes care of itself without any thought, without any concern. It occurs automatically. You see this in infants. The great therapist, not Reich, but he's like the father of psychoanalysis and so on. I can't think of his name. Not Jung, not Reich. I did a keynote address at his institute in Vienna, but it'll come to me in a few minutes. But he said infants live in oceanic bliss. The reason that he said that is because infants have no preferences. So an infant, when you were born, you had no sense of whether you were Christian or Catholic or Muslim or Jew, did you?
No.
You didn't know or have any sense or interest in whether your skin was tan, light color, dark color, or any shade in between. You didn't say, oh, I like pears and apples, but please don't give me peas. You didn't know whether you were male, female, or some variation in between, and you didn't care, and it wasn't even anything in your awareness. It didn't exist. And the reason it didn't exist is because it doesn't exist, except in the mind. However, at some point in time, your parents decided to give you a name, and it was Matt versus Jane. And they gave you a blanket, and it was blue. It wasn't pink. And when you came out of your mother, they put you in a certain ward in the hospital next to boys rather than girls, based on certain aspects of your physicality. And when you were an infant and your body needed to evacuate, urinate, defecate, whatever, it just did it. There was no thinking, oh, I have to hold it or not. It just did it. And then when you got to a certain stage, let's say, you see, children don't cry or make noises as a response, as something conscious. Crying occurs when discomfort is present. Laughing occurs when something sparkles for us. Sadness occurs when something else is going on. Those things occur without us, without choice, without planning, without thought, without anything. They occur just in the same way the sun rises and sets, your body pumps, your body breathes, and so on. The moment that you start to cry because you're uncomfortable, a parent picks you up, tries to comfort you. You feel comforted, it calms down. But if the parent is stressed and says, no, shh, we're in public, you can't cry in public, you're going to disturb the other people. You are conditioned by their response. And the meaning that is made is that what is natural is not normal. And so something begins to develop inside of you that then starts to monitor every response you have in hopes that your responses will be acceptable to those around you. And so the busyness of what you call the monkey mind, the worrying, the running of the business, is all about trying to manipulate a situation so that you can create it in a way that you think is going to give you safety, security, and predictability, three things that have never existed on the planet. That's why we say the only constant is change. The only thing that has changed between your infancy and your adulthood is that you have been conditioned to believe that you are in control of something you have never controlled and will never control. And it's pretty much the case with everyone. And the result of all that thinking ahead, trying to make things happen, trying to manage was the word that you used. The result of all of that is this ambiguous term we call stress. And so it's very simple. Your body speeds up its breathing and its blood pressure and its blood flow and the hormonal release when it needs to, and it does something different when it doesn't need to. And this goes on 24 hours a day, whether you're awake or asleep, it doesn't make any difference. It all does it for you. And it does it in a very, very profound way. It knows what it needs to do before you're even aware of anything occurring at all. So take an animal like a bear or a deer in nature, which I'm sure you'll see those in Idaho. During the summer months when it's warm and there's a lot of sunshine, these creatures have shorter hair and their metabolism is functioning faster. And then each day the seasons are changing. The days are getting shorter. There's less light. And their physiology is continually changing way before they have any awareness of it whatsoever. And this is the same for humans. So that we are always in a harmonious relationship with life. The way that occurs is very much of interest to you because it occurs via light. And it occurs because the 100 trillion cells in our bodies have eyes. They have photoreceptors that are designed to detect and respond to light and modify their function so that as life occurs, we meet life exactly. We're not behind life. We're not ahead of life. We meet it exactly. And that occurs for all living things. That's the way it's designed. What's fascinating is that light is invisible. In other words, our cells are designed to detect and respond to the invisible before it becomes visible, which means our whole life is always on point. You cannot be behind or ahead. Each time you meet a situation, you automatically meet it with everything that is available to you at that moment. And if we find that we've been conditioned tremendously and the mind is active all the time, that becomes part of the way we meet life. And that's not a problem, that's a fact. And through those experiences, we continually are reorganizing. In neurosciences, they call it neuroplasticity. The brain is continually remaking itself. Well, so are all the cells of your body. So even if the mind is incredibly active and we're very stressed out, that's also part of the signaling mechanism that brings us back on track. That's called homeodynamic. The body is always bringing itself, and life is always bringing itself into balance. Light is crucially important. You mentioned something about diet. You said most people approach these things with diet, and you found the light diet was perhaps even more fundamental. The reason you came to that discovery is that food is just materialized light. David Bohm, the great theoretical physicist who passed away, said all matter is frozen light. Physicists who are looking at the nature of reality tell us that the most fundamental energy in the universe is the energy we call light. Now, everyone thinks they know what light is because we experience brightness and we confuse brightness, which is a perceptual phenomenon, with light. You cannot see light. It's beyond your ability to label it. Oh, light is this or light is this. No, light is all of this. And so we can't get our minds around it because light acts in physics, they call it in non-local framework. It's not something that is controlled with time and space and conscious thought. It doesn't live by any of those laws. It deals in a field of non-locality, which means it's not affected by time, by space, by any of these things. So if you took 2 photons of light and send them in opposite directions in the universe at the speed of light, and then at some point you tickle the one on the left, the one on the right laughs at exactly the same time. Because our nature is inseparability. We are not separate from light. We are not separate from life. We are not separate from this conceptual thing we call God. So what's fascinating to me is light is the formless essence upon which the form that we call light manifests. And so to look at light is to look at life. And one is invisible and one is visible to us. By looking at life, we can begin to understand the nature of light and vice versa. You know, when you, I don't know if you've ever gone to the beach and played Frisbee with a dog.
No, not with a dog.
But you see people throwing Frisbees at dogs, and the dog always seems to know where the Frisbee is going to be. And seems to get there exactly when the Frisbee hits. It's really fascinating when you see dogs that do this. And what the behavior of this dog is saying to you is that some aspect of the dog is taking the path, the most efficient path to get to where it needs to. Now, the definition of efficiency, ultimate efficiency, is you get 100% response with zero investment. That's ultimate efficiency. It's the way the universe works. Nobody's pushing these planets in the sky. It's all occurring by itself. So when you look at the behavior of a dog, as I gave you in this example, it gets there in the least amount of time and in the most efficient route. What's fascinating about that is the way light behaves. No matter where light is moving, it always gets there in the most efficient, fastest route. Our bodies are made of this light. And your purpose in the world, and part of that is this business you're speaking about, that is an expression of who Matt is. That's also occurring in the same way. You didn't decide to make a business. Something decided for you. It came to you one day free of charge, maybe when you were sitting at a restaurant having a a meal, or maybe you woke up in the middle of the night and you had to write all these things out. Oh my God, I have to do this business with blue blocking glasses or whatever it is. It came to you as a gift. And then somewhere in there, this mind that we call ego says, I have a business. I created it. I manifested it. I. It's not true. Something directed us from where we do not know to bring forth into the world part of our purpose for being. All you did was follow the directive, and it took you on a series of lessons. Part of those lessons are coming from all the people that you've had the pleasure of meeting, and who you spoke to. That was not an accident either. All those names came to you in ways you probably would not have anticipated. Maybe you were looking at something on Google and all of a sudden somebody's name comes up out of nowhere and something takes you to their website and you say, oh my God. So there is a very mysterious aspect of this which initiates or inspires the movement of our life in the same way as it inspires the movement of the planets, the movement of the tides, Mother Nature, and so on. And that thing, which is a no thing, is inseparable from light. And so it's very difficult for most people to speak about these things because they speak of these things conceptually. There's a lot of people that enjoy speaking about something called consciousness. And they have ideas about consciousness, and they're aware of all the research that's been done about consciousness. But I often wonder, what direct experience do you have that would give you some knowing, some sense of knowing about what is consciousness? What is this thing? And so that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in truth beyond opinion. I'm interested in those things that are all the time. Not something that comes and goes, not a theory that's good for 6 months and then shifts to something else. Something that is very fundamental. When I went to school, they said knowing it by heart. That's the way the teachers described it. And it had nothing to do with memory. And the teacher would say, your first impression is always the right one. And what they were saying is there's something inside our humanity that knows without knowing how it knows. And that knowing is exactly what I'm speaking about. Boy, that's a long answer to a short question.
I think that was a really good answer. I'm going to be digesting that for a while. But what I've gathered thus far is I'm, by the way, very much open to, or accepting maybe of the concept of God and these sorts of things. I wouldn't consider myself an atheist, in other words. And so when you explain these things, intuitively, I know you're right, that it wasn't me who thought of this business. And sure, I credit myself, I did this and I did that and I did this and I did that and I researched this and I researched that. But really, yeah, it was the circumstances and some force that I don't fully understand that propelled me to do things the way that they've been happening. And if I look back honestly at the whole thing, it's like every single positive thing that I did that was done through me, even, came to me in some inspiration. It wasn't like I sat there and thought, and even if I did sit down and tried to think what could I do to grow this business, even if that was like my intention, it begs the question, where was that intention coming from, to sit down and ask and then when the thoughts came in, where were they coming from, so it's a very interesting, and that way I've been looking for a long time for, what are the fundamental beliefs that I'm holding that are causing me to feel stressed a lot of the time. And you really just answered that. I'm going to re-listen to that as well. And so going forward, maybe my takeaway, and the takeaway of anyone maybe who's feeling this way, might be see that you're not in control, even when you think you're in control. And basically, are you suggesting, do you think the best way to go is just to let the first instinct sort of guide things? Just more or less as one walks through life?
All these questions, there's only a knowing about these questions when one discovers who they are. Now, if you think that you're Matt Marruca and you've got brownish blonde hair, and you have relatives in Idaho, and you have a business called Raw Optics, and you have this and that, and you identify, like almost all human beings, most of us feel unique, aside from physically looking a certain way, but our real uniqueness is what we call our mind. In fact, we're 100% sure that it is our, because it sounds like our voice. And it houses these things that we call our ideas, our beliefs. And this is what we believe makes us unique. And for years, we were led to believe that what makes us unique and more evolved than other creatures is because we can think. Well, now we begin to realize that all creatures, whether they are animal or plant, also seem to be impregnated with this something called consciousness. A plant knows the difference between drops of rain falling on its leaves and the pitter-patter of the legs of a caterpillar. It knows the difference, and one causes no concern and the other one causes stress. And it's measurable. And so the question is, who are we? There was a very, very famous teacher in India named Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi was one of the most revered saints of India. And Ramana had a process he called self-inquiry. And the purpose of self-inquiry was to discover who you are and who you're not. And so what Ramana would say is, or would do, is he would suggest to his students, next time a thought arises, and we know when a thought arises, you know when a thought thinking is going on, ask yourself silently, who had this thought? And most people then hear something inside that says, me. I had this thought. And then Ramana would say, the next question is, who am I? And then notice. When I first was introduced to this particular method, I would silently ask who had this thought. I would hear me. Who am I? And as soon as I said, who am I? My experience was total silence and quiescence. Everything just became silent. Like everything. The mind silenced. There were no questions about anything. In that instance, everything was known, which essentially means there's nothing to think about. Everything just is. Now, I will describe it in a different way. When you are watching your television set at home and sitting on the couch, you don't ever believe that you're the TV set or the movie you're watching. Your body may change if the character is running fast or in a, some sort of an exciting movie. Your heart may feel different. You may have tears if it's a love story. So we respond empathically. You can feel or identify with the characters, but you never believe that you are the TV or the characters. Why? Because you're sitting on the couch. The TV's over there. Let's imagine the TV is what you call the mind. My mind. And it all of a sudden starts to create pictures, as your TV does, or even words, sometimes together, sometimes not. Just like you would notice that on your TV screen, which is not you, you also notice it on the surround sound system that you call my mind. You notice it. Why do you notice it? Because you're not it. You are aware of the activity of the external world, the sensations within the body, and the activity of the mind, because your true essence is that you are the witness or the observer of all that is. The difference between the mind, and that's the first realization that it's not my mind. It's just the mind. It's just a mechanism that is like a library of all the conditioning that my aspect of humanity has had for millions of years. And so the first thing you realize is that I am the noticer of that activity, not that activity. I only think I'm that activity when I forget that I'm the noticer of it. So that's the difference between you get an inspiration about starting a business called Raw Optics, and then later you say, it's my business. I came up with this great idea. One recognizes that something came to you. You were the noticer of this idea, this vision that inspired you to move in that direction. And the other one is when we forget that we are the noticer, and then it becomes all about me. I'm the creative source. I create my own reality. I make the right choices, and so on and so forth. When you begin to notice that your essence is a noticer, that has no identity, no identifying characteristics. This noticer is not male or female. It's not a certain color skin. It has no religious preferences. It's just a noticer. It's a field of noticing. You could call it consciousness. And your field of noticing and my field of noticing are the same field of noticing. And in its purest form, I call it awareness, because there's just awareness. And when this awareness is occurring, that which is seeing are the eyes of God. God is not some theoretical concept in heaven. God is, in fact, that focal point of light, an extension of divinity of all of life. It's not when we speak about God, it's a conceptual idea, but what I'm sharing is you can actually get in touch with that thing, not as something separate. It's like when a drop of water falls into the ocean, there's no longer a drop of water, there's just the ocean. When there's a realization that your essence is the noticer, for that instance, you disappear. And the you that's used to doing and managing and all that, it disappears. And then while you're not there, everything is taken care of. It's quite miraculous. So the answers, the questions that you have from me, they come from nowhere. I have no idea what's coming out of my mouth. I am being spoken just like I am being breathed. And the same for you. And then life becomes very effortless. Now, effortlessness, and by the way, for those listening, the difference between mind and awareness is mind speaks. It has an internal conversation. Awareness doesn't speak, has no voice. There is a knowing, but there's nothing coming out. So if you hear a voice, it's not this. It's the mind impersonating something, which is what the mind does. What's fascinating about all this is that when one awakens to this discovery, they become very ordinary. They're not wearing white robes and claiming to be this or that. They're just very ordinary people. Just very ordinary because they're struck with humility. And then they can't explain why they find themselves involved in this and not involved in this, because something else is guiding things. I know from this because 44 years ago, I had an instance of that revelation, and the result of that instance was that my ability to see changed instantaneously by about 300% with no changes to my eyes. So I could read the eye charts, and I still can, but no eye doctor in the world would say I should be able to read them based on the prescription of the eyes. What happened? Something became aware of the source of the seeing. In other words, who we are, our true essence. All of this may sound philosophical, mysterious, all of these different words. They're none of those things. Anyone that knows me knows my word is my deed. I never have dishes in the sink. The bed is always made. The bills are always paid. The emails are always returned, and quickly. You already know that. You have been dealing back and forth with my assistant, who is a direct mirror image of who I am. Has to be that way, because they are representing my life's message, if you will. So nothing gets prioritized. Oh, we'll do this now, we'll do this later. No. Things that have no place in my life, like extraneous emails that everyone gets, spam and all these things, we're unsubscribed immediately. We don't get any junk email. It's very, very rare. What comes and the time that it comes determines when it's responded to. And it becomes less and less and less stressful. And then I'll add just one more thing. This awakening doesn't mean you're going to live forever, make all the money in China, always get the parking spot in front of the health food store, or any of these kind of things. You may you'll still get sick at times. You'll still have pain if, God forbid, you lose someone you love. You don't become godlike. You just occupy more of your full humanity.
I think everyone would want that, myself included. I'm glad you bring up the assistant, because I'm actually in the process of hiring my own assistant, and I will definitely have them review what you just shared, the recording here. And with emails and things, it just completely blows my mind, because I always think to myself, well, and this can apply, I think, across many different items in life, but for me, it's emails. You know, there's so many emails coming in that if I just responded to them as they came in, or even I think if my assistant just responded to them as they came in, they wouldn't necessarily be able to make meaningful progress in other things, because it would just be responding to emails.
You know, one has to determine what is really calling to them. For instance, most of the world is functioning on social media. It's a sign of your success is how many followers you have, how popular you are with people you would normally never even deal with. That doesn't call to me. I mean, I enjoy putting out things that I think are valuable, but I don't do it for any reason. I don't do it because I want more followers or I want people to buy things. I'm not interested in selling anything. I like this. I like having these, for me, life-altering conversations that really matter. Whether we're speaking about light, or we're speaking about life, or the interaction in between, the most important things for people, for everyone, is health and happiness. We all want to be as healthy as we can, and we want to be content in our life. I don't care what you're doing, whether you're a cancer researcher or a selling making available blue blocking glasses to help people working on computers. At the end of the day, we're all working because we want to be successful at life, the thing few people are successful at. So while many of these things may sound philosophical, they're not philosophical at all. I'm talking about absolute common sense practicality. I don't live in the woo-woo world. I'm not interested in ungrounded ideas. You mentioned that you were in Costa Rica and you came to Idaho to move away from the pandemic. Well, I'm sure if you're like everyone else, you probably have had hundreds of emails about everything from this is a hoax to this occurred in a lab in China to this and that and a gazillion different points of view. For me, I say, who cares? There's only a couple things I know to be absolutely true. A lot of people are getting sick. It's happening all over the world, which means this is an event that none of us have ever experienced except someone that may be over 100 if they have the memory. So this is a totally unique experience no one has ever had. And whether you're an ant, an elephant, a dinosaur, or a human, when you encounter something you've never encountered, you stop in your tracks and you experience your expression of worry, concern, hypervigilance, call it stress, call it whatever you want. And everyone's experiencing that. A lot of people are sick. A lot of people are dying. At first we said, oh, it's just older people. Now we're finding all kinds of strange things, and even in children. So it doesn't make any difference to me what anyone thinks about where it originated, or I don't care about that. What's in my awareness are a group of things. One is a lot of people are getting sick and a lot of people are dying. A lot of people are suffering because it's affected their ability to earn a living. A lot of people are on the front lines taking care of patients or taking care of hospitals or making sure food is available. And I find naturally my heart just is so there with them. Simultaneously, the world has never been quieter. There's less traffic. The silence is golden. It's profound. The creatures are singing more, the birds. The oceans are cleaner than they have ever been. The skies are clearer. There has probably been a more significant impact on the climate than all of our prior efforts put together. All of this is going on at once. This ecstatic silence and profound improvement to our climate and environment, and this incredible pain going on at the same time. That's the only thing I know to be of value. All that which I'm holding in my hands at the same time. Not one over the other. Both are going on, and I feel it all, and I respond to it all. So that's what's moving me in my life at this second, and perhaps at some point in time we'll even be able to talk about the glasses that you are making available to people and many other ways in which we are impacted by light.
I would love to. Well, do you have Do you
I
have
do.
the full time till
I have the time.
you have the time? Well, I would love to talk more about it. This is all I didn't necessarily expect. Although when I was reading, Luminous Life, I had read your other book, Light, Medicine of the Future, over a year ago now, and it taught me so much. And then with Luminous Life, it is much more in the realm of spirituality. As I'm assuming as your knowledge evolved, that's sort of where things went. At least it seems. So
I want to tell you that real spirituality and real common sense are exactly the same thing. To live a spiritual life is to see that life is as it is. I'm not dealing with things that I think. I'm dealing with the way I directly experience life. So my form of science and spirituality is common sense. It's grounded in everyday life.
So when someone like myself or anyone else hears the things you're teaching about or reads one of your books or hears one of your lectures or podcasts and says to themselves, this sounds accurate, like someone hears what you're teaching and it just, as opposed to one of the other thousands, millions of people who are sharing a message online, this is one that really resonates. And someone asks, like I'm asking myself as well, and I do whenever I'm inspired by someone, and I have very much been inspired by your books and just speaking with you now. So the question becomes, how can I make this a part of my life? How can I really implement this? What are the practices? What are the mantras? Is there a mantra, a way of thinking, a way of approaching each day? I mean, in many senses, I guess you've already answered that through your previous answers. But what advice would you give, and what steps that someone who is so conditioned, just like myself and so many others, in the thinking mind, to just start stepping into this, both mental and maybe going out in the sunlight, anything like whatever you suggest.
Yeah. First of all, if we're having this conversation, which you and I are, or if one is listening to this conversation, they're already on the right track. Doing nothing, they're on the right track. Something has brought them here. That's number one. What is there to do? Nothing. I'm not doing anything. I don't sit and meditate during the day. I'm not eating a certain diet to cleanse myself. I don't have a ritual table with crystals, and those are all conceptual things. Just notice and allow your life to take you. Notice what catches your eye, because that's what's looking for you. That's where your attention is naturally going, because that's where it needs to go. No thought required. Just go there. Everyone, when they steps outside on a warm, sunny day, they all make the same sound. Why? That sigh of relief lets you know you're in the right place. You don't need to understand why the sun is valuable and so on. Just step outside. You'll immediately realize what it is. If you're protecting your eyes from the light, because someone said you should be wearing sunglasses all the time, spend some time in the shade without them. so that you allow your system just experiment. Just so allow yourself to experience something different. When people say to me, how do I improve my eyesight? Try an experiment. Remove your glasses in places you feel safe, like in your home, maybe when you're sitting to eat, and notice what arises. Get to know what's going on that is typically invisible to you. In terms of what to do, there are certain things that people have written that touch people because they ring true, not because they sound interesting. There's a difference. The mind is intrigued with all kinds of unusual ideas. But then there are things that just ding. It's called resonance. Resonance. It's what causes us to merge with that when we fall in love. And it doesn't make a difference whether it's a person or a book or a movie. Boom, you're there. And when you're there, you disappear. And so do your problems. If you've been in love, you know that it just sort of overtakes you. There's nothing you can do about it. And so that's what happens when we are in resonance with something. Those two similar tuning forks, if you will, become one. And they become much bigger. And something becomes bigger than either of us individually. And we find ourselves in an altered state. In a state that, gee, we'd love to get to if we were meditating or praying or eating right, you know. There's something going on right this second in our conversation that has taken me into a state of active meditation and moved you into a state of passive meditation until something shifts and then you become the mouth of God and I become the ear of God. And that's what's going on when we interact with each other. But each of us have been taken someplace. Now, what did you do to get here? Did you meditate? Did you fast before we started this? Did you pray? Actually, you didn't do anything. You just got on Skype, and so did I. We've never seen each other before. We've never had a direct conversation. And now we find ourselves in the core of reality, conversing on things that we had no idea we would get into, saying things that are coming out of each of our mouths that we have no idea where they're coming from. This state that's happening right this moment, not only for you and me, but for your listeners, a good percentage of your listeners are also experiencing this right now. None of us did anything to get here. So when you say, give me the steps, give me the stepping stones so that I can go from here to there. There are no stepping stones from here to there. There is no technique. It's the awareness that is curative. It's the hearing of it. It's the thing in you that guided you and me to this moment right now. It's the thing that plopped your book, my book, into your hands at some point, or caused you to reach out to other people that you felt inspired by. For years, I have worked, aside from when I was teaching and facilitating events, which I've done many, many, many. Over the last several years, I work with people individually. I mentor a very small number of people individually. It's not like a online. I mean, we do this online because I live in Maui and they don't live in Maui. They might live in the Czech Republic or something. When I began doing this, it was about helping people to solve problems. After a while, I started realizing that that wasn't of interest to me. There was a need for that, but not a need for me to be involved in that, because I didn't see people as having problems. What I saw is that everything that we call, or most of the things we call problems, are just because it's a case of mistaken identity. We think that we are the ideas and the beliefs rather than the observer of the ideas and the beliefs. So people say to me all the time, well, what do you do in your mentoring program? I say, well, I incorporate things that I've discovered about color as a very interesting way of desensitizing from things that have triggered us in our lives, and something that allows us to take in more light and more life and to be more at ease. So I incorporate that, which is valuable. But other than that, I have no agenda. I don't know what each person needs. Each person just, obviously their purpose for being is to be who they are. So that's why they are made in this unique way. That's why they have this particular nature. There's nothing wrong with any of that. So a lot of what I share, you see, it's hard for a person to continue to believe that they have a problem when those around them see them as whole. So when I'm graced to work with someone or to interact, and I call this a special type of friendship because it's not therapy or coaching or any of that, the only thing I can do is remind them of the fact that they're just fine. And as there is an acceptance for who we are because there's nothing wrong with it, all of a sudden the problems begin to disappear. So, that's the way that I attempt to support people in whatever way I can. But don't be confused. They're supporting me in the same way. I'm supporting, my whole life is growing because each time I have one of these ecstatic conversations, I'm experiencing more ecstasy. And that's something very beautiful because we live in a world where along with ecstasy, there's also pain. There's also discomfort. There's loss. There's illness, all these things. And so if we can have these moments of ecstasy in the midst of all these other things that are going on, of which none of us can avoid, your appreciation for life as it is really changes. So light is a very fundamental aspect of my work with people, but it's all about bringing more illumination and clarity about their life.
I keep thinking about my emails.
Yeah.
Well, as a sort of metaphor for life and the struggles that come with it, I imagine so. There's things that come through an email inbox, and in some sense, it's like an analogy for life that are things that I'm actually excited about. Resonance, as you
Yeah.
described, I
Right.
want to answer this and engage in this because I resonate with it and nothing other
Right.
than that. And then
Right.
there are things that absolutely I do not resonate with to the nth degree. I do not resonate with them, and I, for some reason, and this is more of the thinking mind, I think I feel compelled to engage nonetheless, and that's for various reasons, which I'm not very sure of. Would you say that, for example, there are things that maybe we have to deal with or we have to do in life?
Give me a concrete example. Let's not deal in theories.
I
Let's
think
deal in
that's
reality.
a great idea. So,
Yeah.
if, for example, something comes that is a partnership with a great brand that's educating people, inspiring people, and helping to change lives, and they want to work together. And this I'm excited
Beautiful.
about, right?
Of course.
I'm rolling with it. And then, for example, there are, let's think of something that just doesn't resonate. There are, similar to, you said, there's interviews that come to you that it isn't the right time. There's people who want to collaborate and work together in some fashion where it to me just doesn't resonate. It doesn't feel like it's going to be the best use of time and the
Right. Yeah, so of course everyone gets that. So when it's exciting, respond with your excited place and take it to the next level until you see, as long as it continues to be inspiring, you're there. The moment it stops being inspiring, you're gone. So when something comes and it isn't it, just say thank you maybe you have an assistant. Thank you so much, for reaching out to us. However, we're not available for this at this time. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Boom. And you know what? It doesn't have to be a pat response. You are grateful that they've reached out to you. Of course you are. Why not? Someone thinks you're doing something good. What a sweet thing. They might want to do something with you. But you always have to look at, is this a match made in heaven? Relationships only work if everybody is the same height. That's what makes it work. I don't see myself any differently than I see you. Without good questions, there are no good answers. The questions and answers come from the same source. Once we begin to realize that, the interviews that something inside says, of course, I want to go there. They take you there because they expand our life and so on. I get hundreds of things all the time. I've been out in the world. I've spoken, more than 2,000 times worldwide in talks and events and week-long and 10-day trainings and God knows what. And so a lot of people write. Sometimes it's a match made in heaven, and there's always a yes to that. And sometimes it isn't, and then you have to say yes to your no. When something does not resonate, say yes to that. And when it does resonate, say yes to that. So whatever it is, always say yes to that aspect of your humanity that immediately knows if the shoe fits or it doesn't.
Thank you. That is amazing advice. that is going to help me a lot, and I think it applies to a lot of different things. in my mind, I'm thinking about, for example, a lot of folks who are maybe not satisfied with their life path. You know,
Right.
I have, well, my friends are actually mostly in college. I'm college aged, so I'm doing this at a younger period in life with business. I forfeited the college path myself, but you know, they're generally having a good time. But for example, I know a lot more adults, I'd say, or spoken with adults who don't enjoy. It seems that they don't maybe like their job, or I'm sure you've spoken and worked with many people who just aren't quite content. You know, I think maybe it's a larger portion of the world than not, or at least of
Yeah, it's
United States.
probably about 99.9%. That's all.
Yeah, so it's fairly worth considering. And I would ask, you know, what is the step in, you know, well, why do you think this is the case, that is the reality, you know?
You know, each of us has a purpose for being. An apple tree never questions whether it should make oranges or bananas. It only has one thing that it's here to do: create apples. Some trees are designed to move easily with the wind, like palm trees. Other trees are not. Big wind comes, they crack. We're each like a different kind of tree. Some of us are here to create fruit. Some of us are like a tree that creates flowers and has a beautiful essence. Others are trees with thorns. You can't get too close to them. It isn't because we're good people or bad people. We all have a different design. Some of us are designed to eat meat. Some of us are designed to be able to eat almost anything. Others seem to only do well or better with vegetables. These are not ideas. This goes through Mother Nature, wherever you look. Whether it's in the fish kingdom or the bird kingdom or the animal kingdom or human kingdom, we all have a different nature. And that nature defines why we're here. What is it we're designed to do? We're designed to be. And the things that come forth in the world from us are the things we know by heart. I'm not talking about something I studied in school. I'm not quoting to you from somebody else's books. I'm not referencing what I say because somebody else proved it. I couldn't care less. These are the things that there's a knowing inside about. I don't need to prove it to anyone or disprove it. It doesn't make any difference. So, you know, my son and daughter are adults, and they're both very artistic. Now, when I went to school, if you were an artist or an actor or a dancer or a singer, you can't do that. You can't make a living doing that. You have to be a doctor, a dentist, or a lawyer, or a politician. Well, I followed that track. Even though I had an award-winning rock and roll band, even though I was a high-level competitive sprinter, was an athlete, I wanted to sing. My father said, no, you got to go to college and do this, and that. I went. I did all these things. I practiced for 13 years, and then it became clear to me that my purpose for being was to share things with the world that I had discovered. And so I left all that and went into the unknown. I was never a reader. I've read very few books in my life. Writing was not anything that I knew anything about. Try to imagine the miracle I felt when I wrote a book. It was like, it brought me to tears. I thought I was stupid, Matt, because I didn't read and everyone else read. I got degrees because I didn't know who the hell I was and wanted to prove to the world that I was the person who I didn't think I was. So now I come back to who I've always been. Just an ordinary human being who's very sensitive, like yourself. So I went around and around and around doing all the things that I thought I was supposed to do, but no matter what I did, I could not escape my destiny. Here I am. So for all of the individuals who are unhappy with what they're doing, but they feel they have to do it because they make a good living from it, something is letting them know that something wants to grow in a slightly different direction. They don't have to do anything. They just have to be aware of it. And the more aware of it they are, the more it will grow. And when the moment is right, they will be taken where they need to be taken. And there's nothing they'll be able to do about it, whether it's a relationship they're in that isn't really working or something else. If they are meant to go, they're going to go, whether they want to or not. And if they're not meant to go at this time for whatever reason we will never understand, that's where they will remain.
That's a really good answer. So we've reached the time we had initially scheduled. Would you like to speak another little bit? I'm free for the next half hour or so.
Let's do it.
All right. Again, I love that we've gone through all of these more common sense discussions. You're also obviously, in addition to just being, I would say, a sort of spiritual, very knowledgeable person on spirituality. You might say it's just common sense. I think they're both pretty accurate. But obviously you have this lifetime of knowledge about how light affects the body and how we can use color and light to heal and how they interact with our physiology. So I think, if maybe we'll do another interview in the future, I think that would be great. But just for someone who might just hear this particular interview, I'd love to ask you some questions more as they relate to light and your knowledge.
Good.
So could you
Perfect.
tell me a bit about how you became interested in this alternative field in light? And I've heard some of these things in your book. And really then, as you went through your journey, what are the most profound things that struck you for people to be able to heal themselves from these modern ailments that we're facing?
In 1971, when I was still in my medical training, I had just started in my clinical work, and one of the first patients that I had the pleasure of working with was a child who had what was called a lazy eye. It's actually called amblyopia, and they were legally blind in that eye, and there was no way of improving the eyesight. But there was nothing pathologically wrong. You couldn't see that there was some reason for it, just couldn't see. And so your question, what am I going to do for that person? And I had asked one of the clinical doctors, the supervisors, what they might suggest. I'd never seen anything like this. He says, well, I don't know exactly. They might need some vision training, but there's this technique I heard, this device called the Otwell instrument. What is that? Well, Harry Otwell was an optometrist in Alabama, I think, and he had found that looking at a yellow filter, or looking through a yellow filter, let's say at yellow light, while it was flashing on and off slowly, sometimes was able to cause a shift here. So I got this little thing that you screw into a light bulb, into a socket. And it was, and then when you put a light bulb in there, a regular light bulb, you put in a yellow light bulb in there, it would just go on and off. And I had the person look at that for a certain amount of time each day. Well, miraculously, within 10 days, their eyesight started improving and actually went all the way back down to one line less than 20/20. Wow. What was that? I'd never heard of such a thing. And so I got involved with using colored light while I was still in school. And then I was doing vision training and so on when I got out. And I think it was 1974, I went to a conference in Miami by a group within the field that worked in the field of preventive vision care, vision training, and so on. And the keynote address was this guy I'd never heard of before, who was doing some very interesting thing with lights and plants and so on, a guy named John Ott. You named one of your glasses for him. And it was fascinating what he was talking about, that essentially plants can't grow properly under the wrong kind of light. And animals can't either. And humans respond differently under different types of lighting. Well, John and I became good friends. He lived up the state in Florida. I would frequently visit him and stay at his home, actually in an apartment that he had. And we corresponded for years and years and years. In fact, he wrote the introduction, I think, or the preface to my first book. So I got very intrigued with this thing called light that everybody knew was healthy, because when we all like to go out to the beach or be in the sunshine, but no one had actually quantified these things or looked at these things and so on. And like most people, as I started learning about these things, I started using them. One of my first patients was my mother, who had gone blind in one of her eyes because the blood flow to that eye stopped. To make a long story short, I was able to bring back a big part of her vision after her being totally blind for 8 months. And that, I don't know how the hell this stuff was happening. It was just mind-blowing to me. And it opened up a whole area that I didn't know anything about. And so I just started looking, and every time I'd hear of someone doing something around the world, like you, I would pick up the phone and I would call them. We didn't have any internet back then. You couldn't Google these things. And most libraries didn't have anything on this topic. So I was just, looking in the dark. And in 1976, after I had this miraculous healing of my eyesight, and by the way, I haven't worn any glasses in 44 years of any type for distance or reading, and I'll be 73 in November. And this occurred without doing anything, by the way. When that occurred, something in my awareness expanded. And one of the things that I began noticing was the subtle energetic emanation around living things. Plants, mountains, trees, humans. You call it the aura or the biofield. And I started noticing that this field around the body changed depending on the state of the person. So I would be sitting with someone, noticing this light glow, if you would, which sometimes had colors in it and so on. And I started noticing what would happen when the person started thinking. And I would do experiments with lots of people. And I started noticing that when people started thinking, this thing just disappeared. It was like the system gave off a glow when it was in a state of peace and effortlessness. But the moment it started working on stuff, boom, it disappeared. There was something else that disappeared simultaneously. Their breath. The moment they started thinking or working on something, their breath collapsed. So a lack of breath is associated with dying. So when we're engaged in something that constricts our breath, it literally starts putting us on a downward trend. So I realized that if we're doing something and unconsciously holding our breath, we're not actually doing something that is impacting us positively. We're actually doing something that is decreasing our performance, our efficiency, our health, our wellness. And yet, I realized from these experiments, we're all indoctrinating in thinking ahead and working things out and making shit happen and so on. And every time we do that, the most fundamental thing that breathes us, another way of saying that is that inspires us, is collapsed. And I knew that the way we teach people to learn is actually in opposition of the way learning is actually naturally designed to take place. And so I started questioning all of these things, not only about light and life, but the way we've been conditioned to be. And I spent years working with kids that had learning issues, thousands of them. And I discovered after a while they were all geniuses that had been labeled with the label that said something's wrong with me. And so my work wasn't about fixing their illusory problem or the problem the parents thought they had. My work was about reflecting to them their genius, which is what I began developing ways of working with people that allowed them to discover that there was a state where the answers came free of charge. And I worked with thousands of kids. I then worked with Olympic athletes, professional athletes, always about how we enter the zone, how we get to the edge. And so that's what my life's work has been about. And in terms of light, I read a gazillion different things about light and listened to speakers, and this color does this and this color does this and so on. And I discovered that that wasn't actually true. When I actually started looking at people, I realized that people were very receptive to certain colors and very unreceptive to others. In fact, they responded to light in the same way they responded to life. They were very comfortable with some aspects of life and very uncomfortable with others. And I found this interesting because I was going through a really difficult time of my life. And this became the grist for my mill. And so my work with color now isn't based about using color to fix this or to fix that, although that's a very viable area. But it's about basically finding how you respond to color, whether it feels like something that you're able to embrace or whether that color feels like, I'm not very comfortable with that. And as we become comfortable with the colors that used to feel uncomfortable, I found that we become more open and comfortable with the aspects of life that used to trigger us and catalyze what we call stress. So I developed ways of working with color that had nothing to do with fixing and everything to do with becoming a full spectrum human being. Not liking and disliking, but at ease with life in general. There's millions of ways of using color for healing. I wrote about that in my first book. There are millions of things that we can do that are beneficial. You are involved in one of those aspects, which is realizing that technology is a wonderful, wonderful tool, a major part of our existence. And at the same time, technology, most technology, even though it's inspired by inspiration, as soon as business gets into it and we're looking for cheaper ways of making it and shortcuts, if you will, when we're doing that, our field of vision narrows and we see the effect of things, but we totally miss the side effects. And so your field, for instance, which is one of your interests at least, is noticing that the spectrum of light that comes off of computers and handheld devices and so on is totally unnatural. It looks like nature, but it couldn't get further from nature. And so because we spend so much time in front of it, it impacts us. So people are now looking at all different ways of protecting our systems with these things that pretty much occupy our life. And we all have to do this in balance. So we use tools for certain things. We use tennis shoes, for instance, if we're going to be walking or running, because our feet feel more comfortable with a little padding. But we should never forget that it's nice to put our feet right on the ground too. So we use all of these different things. Blue blocking glasses is an example. But we must never forget that we need sunshine. That sunshine is the most powerful environmental factor we have. Not only is every aspect of our physiology light dependent, but we live in the solar system, which means this part of the universe we live in is of or derived from light. That's what solar system means, of or derived from light. So the planet, our humanity, is literally a formed expression of light. So that's a little bit of a response to your question.
Thank you. And I think sort of to just close, sort of to move towards wrapping up here, I would like to ask you, for someone who wants to begin a daily sunbathing practice or a daily light exposure practice. I will be interviewing many experts or folks related to these different subjects, but for your perspective, I would love to hear it. As it
Very
comes to
simple.
sunlight.
Very simple. Forget it as a practice. Just think of what's natural. So, for instance, I step out on my deck every morning, and I like to sit in my hot tub. The sun is out. I'm naked. Okay? I'm letting my entire body receive the rays of the sun at a time when it's not excessively bright, but it's bright enough. So for an average person who doesn't live in Maui and maybe doesn't have a hot tub, go out in your yard or your deck. You can do it with a bathing suit if you want. Leave large areas of your body unclothed. Lay outside for 1 minute on your back and 1 minute on your belly. That's what you do day one. If you can each day, increase it by 1 minute or by 30 seconds. Don't use sunglasses. Don't put sunscreens on. Just begin a minute, front and back, increase by 30 seconds or a minute each day. Probably 20 minutes is as much as you need. The light will have a profound impact upon you. I walk every day. About 3 miles or so I walk. When I walk, I have shorts on, my tennis shoes. I take my shirt off. I never wear sunglasses. There's nothing wrong with sunglasses. I just don't need them. It's fine to wear them if it's excessively bright, but most people are artificially hypersensitive to light because they've been indoctrinated to wear sunglasses all the time. The energy from the sun is the optimal fuel mix for our life. It's like getting the perfect octane fuel for the engine of our humanity. So I put a hat on, I go outside, I'm walking for 45 minutes, I don't have a shirt on. Large sections of my body are receiving the light, and it's absolutely profound. Because from your own studies, you know that our cells are in association with something called mitochondria, which is like the engine that drives the cells. And the mitochondria, when it interacts with certain portions of the light spectrum, specifically the red and near infrared portion, which makes up 50% of the energy of sunlight, it takes that light and it converts it into energy, and cellular energy called adenosine triphosphate, ATP. That energy provides the cellular energy for everything from cellular repair to creating new DNA and RNA to cellular transport to cell division. Basically, it's the fuel that drives your body's ability not only to live, but to heal when it needs to heal. So sunshine gives you that free of charge, especially if you're doing it in the morning.
It's literally free of charge, like physical charge. It's,
Right. And it doesn't cost anything. And that in of itself is profound, and there's a whole industry now that's dealing with these devices that do that, and they're very helpful. I give them to clients that are dealing with ocular disease and things like that. But nothing replaces sunshine. Sunshine is really something amazing. that nothing can live without it. Nothing can live without it. So just get outside in the sun, increase the amount of time a little bit each day. Don't push it. Don't burn yourself. If you do it naturally and gradually, your skin naturally thickens to naturally protect you from too much sun. Don't be too concerned about skin cancers and so on. Just do it slowly and gradually. Significant skin cancers, like melanomas, usually occur in places where the sun does not shine, parts of your body that don't even get sunshine. And they are much more prevalent with individuals who have a lack of sunshine rather than an excess of sunshine. So it's more of a light deficiency than a light overdose.
I wanted to ask you about that, and you already answered it, so thank you.
Yeah.
That's usually the primary objective is, well, doesn't the sun cause cataracts, AMD, and skin cancer? And
no,
no.
It doesn't cause any of those things.
Or aging and so on.
You know, sunshine's been here since the beginning of time. It's the healthiest thing we can do. Of course, if we don't get any sun during the week and then we burn ourselves on the weekend, that's not called moderation. But you could do that with eating too much or drinking too much or whatever it is. So moderation is the key. And I say do things gradually. As far as the onset of diseases and so on, it's not so much about the sun. It may be the interaction of the sun with things that we are consuming that may not be very healthy for us, which is most of our diet and so on. It also has to do with the fact that in relation to the eyes, that we use our eyes, we are conditioned to use our eyes in ways that are totally unnatural. This is why we have an epidemic of nearsightedness and wearing glasses. It's the biggest health epidemic in the world. Do you ever wonder why hardly anybody's born needing glasses, but everybody's wearing them? Geez, how did that just happen? Well, we're all conditioned to use the wrong part of our eyes for seeing, and we wear out those parts of our eyes. And so a lot of these things, I think, have to do with the way the foods we consume, our lack of naturalness, our lack of light, and so on.
Thank you.
You are so welcome.
That is the purpose of the Light Diet podcast, because I want to do the best I can for myself and to share this information, like the work you and Dr. Ott and Dr. Wunsch and Dr. Hallwich and Dr. Gurwitch and Pop and all of them have done. I assume you're very familiar with all of them, as you mentioned.
Well, John Ott was one of my mentors. I had the pleasure of spending a couple days with Fritz Pop in his laboratory.
Wow.
In Germany before he passed away. Alexander Wunsch is a very dear friend of mine. I have not met Michael Hollick, but I'm certainly familiar with his work. So, I've had the pleasure of knowing many of the people who are truly pioneers in this area, and my life has been touched by them.
Yeah, the thing that astounded me is there's no podcast there's really not much at all that's specifically focused deeply on this subject and mitochondrial disease. So that's really my intention here. I don't know if you're familiar. Have you heard of Dr. Jack Kruse?
Yes.
So he's the person as you mentioned, through Google whose work resonated with me, and then he kind of shares all these books. He recommends everyone read Dr. Ott's book and Dr. Wunsch's videos and your books. And So it's really just, I think the world needs to know about this. So thank you so much for taking the time today and answering all of these great questions. I will benefit so much personally from just starting to apply this discrimination between resonance and not resonance and saying yes to everything just in the way that is correct for the thing itself, and so much more here. Is there anything else you would like to leave me or any of the listeners here with today?
Yeah. Goethe on his deathbed, his final words were, "More light." My message for the people is love is the answer regardless the question. So saying yes to yourself, saying yes to what resonates as truth for you, is a deep level of love and caring, not only for yourself, but recognizing even for the world what is appropriate for you to take part in and so on. As I used to say to doctors when I trained them, don't work with anyone you don't love. Forget about having another patient. Have another friend. Have someone else that you care about. Those are the guiding principles of my life.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.